Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar from Union Learn about staying positive in lockdown and beyond. So welcome to the webinar. I'm sure that staying positive in lockdown and beyond that is a subject on lots of people's minds. I'll be introducing our speakers in a second. Just to say, we've got David Tross from Birkbeck University and Lisa Francis from the Welsh Union Learning Fund Community Union, and Maisie is with her as well. But I'll be telling you a little bit more about them in a second. So just a bit of housekeeping, really. If you're new to our webinars or whether you have joined us many times, I think it's important to know that there's a chat panel on the right-hand side where it's really helpful, where you can introduce yourself, you can exchange tips and ideas with each other. And my colleagues from Union Learn will be posting links to resources and tips there also. So please use that. You'll see underneath us, there's an Ask a Question button. Please post any questions that you might have for David or Lisa there, and we'll get to them later on in the webinar. So also, something I forgot to add, don't worry if you miss anything or if you want to check some detail, because we'll be sending you a link to the recording of this webinar later today. So, with many employers advising their staff to work from home during this COVID-19 pandemic, taking care of your mind during periods of self-isolation or prolonged time working from home is extremely important, and it's normal to feel stressed, scared and agitated during this situation. So, as I said, we have with us today David Tross, who's a lecturer at Birkbeck University on community development, public policy and social science courses. He researches happiness and wellbeing in the UK and has run numerous wellbeing at work sessions for a range of public, private and voluntary sector organisations. And then we've also got Lisa Francis, a Welsh Union Learning Fund project manager for Community Union, promoting and supporting adult learning. As a former volunteer counsellor and mental health assistant with a postgraduate diploma in cognitive behavioural therapy, Lisa is passionate about mental health and increasing awareness to help individuals through difficult times. So first up, we have David. David, can you introduce yourself and explain in what ways wellbeing is relevant in this crisis?
Thanks very much, Anna. Hi, everyone. My name's David Tross, and I work for Birkbeck University of London, and I've been, as Anna's saying, doing various wellbeing workshops in partnership with trade unions in the last 5 years or so. So, okay, I just wanted to start it off with three things that come out from happiness research that are relevant to this crisis. One of the things that researchers do is look at activities that where people express a sense of great satisfaction and joy, and they are social interaction, volunteering, and being in nature. And what I realize about all three of these things is that most of the things that people say make them happy, you can still do during this crisis. So it's not like suddenly you have to stop everything. Pretty much the only thing you can't do on the list I have, which includes interaction, exercise, being with family and friends, and connecting with the arts, pretty much all of those things you can still do. The one thing you can't do is go on holiday, or at least not yet. But there are some creative responses to this, and I hope my sister won't mind me saying about her holiday last week, where she went to Europe and every day cooked a dish of a particular country and went on some fun walking tours. And that's one of the things that Oliver Burkeman, who I think is a great person to read up on, he writes in The Guardian every week, very practical wellbeing issues. For him, it's about thinking about, okay, how can you find things that are creative and fun? But these activities also link to broader factors of well-being, which is about connecting with people, making a social contribution, and also to do activities where there's a sense in which you can be absorbed and find meaning in them. And one thing I always say when I go around to do well-being at work workshops is that one of my favourite ideas, which you can look at as a brilliant 10-minute animation of this on YouTube, is Dan Pink's work about happiness in American workplaces. And he said the three main things that make people feel fulfilled at work and actually beyond are: one, mastery, being good at stuff; two, autonomy, having a sense in which you feel like you're in control of your lives; and three, purpose, feeling that you are making a contribution, feeling that your life has wider meaning and purpose. Now, all of these things can be still maintained even in the face of difficulty.
Thanks for that, David. We're gonna bring Lisa back now, and she can talk to us about introduce herself and tell us why we need to have good mental health.
Okay, so I'm obviously Lisa. I work for Community Union. I run the Wolf project, the Wales Union Learning Fund project, and covering all our membership in Wales. So Wolf is like ULF in England and SELF in Scotland, and it's funding that is used to support and sponsor individuals to sort of reskill and upskill to increase their employability skills in unionised working places. And we funded a huge range of different courses that are relevant to the sectors that we have membership in. Before I started working for Community, I was a volunteer, a counsellor for a charity called Tialis. And I do have many qualifications in mental health because it's always been something that I've been quite interested in. I've done psychology A-level, psychology in my degree, and done a couple of postgrads in different therapies and everything. But I'm quite passionate about the subject, and I do like to keep up my knowledge in the area. So what is mental health? So we all have mental health. Sometimes you have good mental health, and this is when you're able to be positive and sort of reach your full potential, and you're more likely to be able to cope with difficulties that you may face. And you may play a full part in sort of family and in the workplace and amongst friends and family. But we all have times when we sort of feel a bit down and stressed. And it is quite normal to sort of go up and down that scale, depending on the circumstances in which you find yourselves in and sort of different stages in your life. And I think most people are just trying to find some sort of consistent sort of balance. But it is important to know that everyone is different, and what one person may bounce back from, another may be weighed down by it, and they may take them a lot longer to sort of overcome it. And it's important for people to be more aware of their mental health, so that if they feel that they're spending too much time in the lower scale, then they can take some sort of steps to help themselves, because they could potentially be developing some sort of mental health condition like anxiety or depression. And with 1 in 4 of us, may be experiencing mental health conditions at some point in our lives. And with this pandemic bringing ill health on many people due to the condition being sort of out the norm and unsettling. And the biggest factor for many is that it is out of our control. And I think this is the most important time to sort of practice self-care and to learn and develop new coping mechanisms or strategies. And if you want to learn more about mental health, then Mind is a very good site to visit.
Thanks, Lisa. That's really helpful, I think, especially about being aware about potential symptoms developing before they take hold. Thanks. Okay, David, back to you. Specifically with regard to work issues, what are the wellbeing threats and opportunities in this crisis?
Thanks very much, Anna. I'm very sorry about the connection issue before. I've tried to summarize some of the things I talked about in the chat function, and someone very kindly posted about my talking about mastery, autonomy, or purpose. I think that we shouldn't underestimate the issues and difficulties and threats with this situation. Obviously, I think unemployment is one big thing, and I think levels of anxiety are understandably rising. So the ONS does weekly research on attitudes of the British population, and indeed, it does show increasing levels of anxiety. However, there are some potential opportunities, and these relate to the things that people have indicated over the years that they find dissatisfying with their work. Number one is commuting. So part of the reason where London is seen to have such low well-being is because commuting is something that people, even if they've been doing it for 30, 40 years, don't like. Offices are another issue about well-being at work. One of the things that people really dislike, or most people dislike, is hot desking. And that's because it takes another level of autonomy away from people. I don't think there's going to be any hot desking anytime soon if you do work in offices. And then I think there are some other things about the way that we work. I mean, the UK has fairly low job satisfaction rates compared to equivalent Western countries like, say, France or Germany. One of the issues is about staff engagement and people feeling engaged at work. And I think some of the other issues are about things like flexible schedules, parental leave. And I think all of those things potentially are going to be reevaluated in the face of the crisis. I also think that there are some opportunities in terms of what we know from happiness and wellbeing research, in terms of why have all this happiness and wellbeing research. And one of the reasons is because life in the UK and other Western countries was seen to be struggling. And mainly the reasons for that are about materialism and status competition and bewildering levels of choice. And to some degree, I think the kind of enforced lack of those things at the moment is providing some opportunity to people, for people to reflect. I mean, I'm in London, so maybe I'm biased, but people were saying things like, wow, we've heard birdsong. And we didn't know there were birds because they haven't been seen or heard in London for so many years. So there are some opportunities, I think, to come out of this.
Thanks, David. And thank you, everyone who's been posting some questions. There's some really great questions coming in. So do continue to post them for David and Lisa to get to later. So, David, what tips do you have about the best way to cope when working from home?
Okay, so there are a variety of different ideas about working from home, and I've sort of collated some of the sort of key lessons from them, and I think Anna and the team are going to post some of those links. I've come up with 8, just very briefly. One is to keep a normal schedule. So in a way, one of the key ideas is keep separation of work and home, even when you are working at home. And one of those things is to say, get dressed for work. And this has been something that writers who often work on their own and been isolated have been talking about for the last 20 years, how they often have separate places they go to work, that they are very disciplined about the timings of work, that they have regular breaks. And in a way, what the whole idea is to maintain the idea that there is a difference between work and home life. Setting boundaries in terms of keeping the distinction as well. It's obviously very difficult when people have got families to do that, but some idea about negotiating with others about when you work. The other one is to work in short bursts. I mean, I've been working remotely for about 10 years now, and so I know how much more you can do at home than in an office, because quite a lot of the time in an office, you're not doing any work, you're interacting. And that's actually seen as quite good, according to psychologists. So take short bursts of work. Oliver Burton has got some great tips for procrastinating as well. One of the things I really love is where you say, okay, I've got an hour's work to do and I really don't feel like it. And you set an alarm clock for you set your alarm on your phone for 10 minutes and you just do 10 minutes of work. And after that, the evidence will show that you're probably then likely to go on and do the hour. So almost you have to trick yourself. And he talks about these things called life hacks. The other one, though, is stay connected with colleagues. So even though people have fewer meetings and fewer interactions, keep connected with colleagues, finding a dedicated space at home if possible, and also getting outside and maintaining things like exercise and breaks. And if you can, working near a window, because studies have shown, for example, in large organizations, that there are higher rates of sick leave amongst employees whose desks or workplaces are in environments where they have no natural light. So that's another thing. One of the things I forgot to say before actually was about meetings, because one of the things that people always say when we talk about well-being at work is how they don't like all constant meetings, and in a way, that's one of the things that's quite interesting about this crisis in terms of that meetings are kind of snappier, and this has always been a problem about how we actually deal with meetings. One of the ideas that I like most for employers is having stand-up meetings, if everyone's able to do that, because often that closes the meeting down. So I think there are a range of ideas, but I think they mostly fall under the category of, in a way, don't do that much different. Maintain the distinction between work and home. Distraction-wise, also, all of the stuff I've read is all suggesting don't constantly look at your phone. And if you're going to look at news sources, then find one you trust to do so. And one of the things that Oliver Burkeman said that I really like is, this isn't normal, and we can't sort of, remove uncertainty and anxiety about that. We have to kind of accept it and do what we can do within our control.
Thanks, David. That was some really useful ideas there to try and tips to keep us going. So next up, Lisa, I'm sure many of us have heard of CBT, but can you tell us a bit more about what it is and how it can help?
Yeah, okay, no problem. So CBT is cognitive behavioural therapy. So it's sort of putting together two types of therapy in one. So cognitive, which is thought processes and memories, and behaviours, which sort of look at how you behave and how you react to things. So CBT is just one form of treatment that you can take to overcome problems such as anxiety and depression. There are other forms of therapy, and there's obviously medication. But CBT is different because it is a practical solution-based therapy, which gives you techniques to deal with problems that you may be facing in the present time. And it is a very common talking treatment, and the NHS usually sort of signposts people to this form of therapy. And the main principle of CBT is that your thought patterns affect your emotions and in return your behaviours. So it highlights how negative thoughts can lead to negative behaviours, such as avoidant situations, self-blame, guilt and helplessness. So maybe you overgeneralize, overthink and assume the worst is always going to happen, or place far too much importance on minor details. Or maybe you overthink the shoulds, like I should have said that, or I should have done that. And then you start to make yourself feel guilty about it. So it's changing the way that you think to change the way that you feel. And in return, that should have a more positive behavior. And it can be done through self-help books, apps. There is computerized CBT. And you do have to sort of practice to see a bit of an improvement. But really, it's just about challenging those thoughts and assumptions that you have come to sort of automatically say to yourself after years of saying the same thing and saying the same story. And then you sort of become stuck in this sort of vicious cycle. And it's about trying to break that cycle so that the thoughts sort of don't take over your life. So I'll just give you sort of a recent example of my negative thoughts. So when I was asked to participate in this particular webinar while working from home with two children, I automatically felt quite anxious and nervous about it because I also have a bit of a fear of public speaking, and this is probably the most amount of people I've ever spoken to in one hit. But my instant thought was, I can't do this. Everyone's going to be looking at me. I'm going to mess up and I'm going to be really embarrassing. So my initial behavior, if I let those thoughts sort of take their run, could have been to avoid the webinar completely, just saying, no, I'm not doing it. However, I readdressed those thoughts which stopped me from acting out that behaviour. Because if you can face the fear and you can manage to get through it, then you will gain more faith in your own ability to cope with situations and therefore gain a bit of control back. And it's gaining a positive response from something that once scared you.
Thanks, Lisa, and thank you for giving us that sort of very personal example of CBT and something that you've experienced recently. And actually, you know, I think we'll all agree that Macy is adding to it. It's a situation for many at the moment. Lots of us working from home. There are infants and toddlers around, and it's just daily life. So next question about CBT. Can you talk a little bit more about some of the techniques that people can use to be more positive, please?
Yeah, okay. So if you were to sort of look into CBT, because obviously you can try and do this yourself, you don't technically have to go see a therapist. Sort of the first sort of technique that you can do is called a mood diary or journal. And it's a great way for you to keep track of those negative thoughts, to help you recognize them and challenge them. It's almost putting them on trial to see if they're valid or just a load of nonsense. And you can find many of them online. So usually it's set up in the table, and in the first column you will have a situation. So it's here that you write the situation that is giving you, that bit of stress or anxiety. So let's use the lockdown as an example. So maybe not being able to see your friends and family. And then in the next column, it will be the thought. So what is the negative thought that is playing on your mind? Maybe it's, I'm going to end up alone. How am I going to cope without them? What if one of them gets ill? And then the next column then will be the emotion that thought is giving you. So it'll be like the sadness, anger, fear. And then it's the behavior. So how are you reacting to the thought? So maybe you unintentionally start taking your frustrations out on your loved ones around you. Maybe you start socially isolating by not reaching out on any forms of social media or the communications. Or maybe you don't know how to use a video calling or Zoom. So the thoughts could be, I'm stupid. And in the next column, that is the most important because it is the alternative thought. What could be a more positive thought to have? Maybe it's, I'm going to learn how to use Zoom or video calling. I'm going to do a family night, such as a quiz night. I'm going to check in with my friends regularly. I'm going to plan some wonderful events, when this is over. Maybe make yourself a little bit of a bucket list of things that you want to do when you're able to. And it gives you that sense of control over your life so that the thoughts can stop dictating you. And there's many apps available online. The NHS have some good ones on their website. There's one on there called Catch It, which works in a similar way to the mood diary, where it's catching that negative thought and then how you think about it after a bit of reflection.
Thanks, Lisa. That's really helpful. Bit of an omission. I can't actually see the chat at the moment. It's frozen for me about 20 minutes ago. So I'm assuming that there are lots of links being posted there by my colleagues. Fantastic. So yeah, do look in the chat and do look for any of the resources that are there, and they will be sent round to you all later today. So next question I've got is for David. Can you offer some tips for coping more generally during this COVID-19 pandemic and beyond?
Thanks, Anna. And by the way, thanks for everyone writing those comments of encouragement. They do definitely help and make a difference. So thank you. So I think if you were to go on the Action for Happiness website, which is an organisation set up to try and think about everyday steps that people can take to maintain their well-being, the three things they're saying at the moment are: listen to the experts, make kind and wise decisions. And I think there's a lot about patience and about people getting frustrated because they're cooped up with other people, and people are making lots of kind decisions. I think one of the fantastic things that's happening at the moment is that this is the largest peacetime mobilisation of volunteers in UK history. At least 1 million people have volunteered, and actually one of the other things that's coming out is people feeling a sense of community and unity returning to the country. And again, that's something that's very positive. So people can make everyday kind and wise decisions. People checking in on their neighbours, having a chat with people. All of the sort of normal rules about British life seem to have been slightly suspended. The other one they say, and they're deliberately aping the Second World War poster, is instead of keep calm and carry on, keep calm and don't carry on, in the sense of maintaining a sense of calm, but not just completely ignoring the health advice and doing what people would normally do. The other thing I just wanted to talk about, and actually it really connects to what Lisa was saying about CBT and writing. One of the quick wins of wellbeing research is what's known as 3 blessings. And this was taken from research with some nuns in America. And the idea is that every night before you go to bed, you write down 3 things that you were grateful for in that day. And these can be very small things. And the idea is to train your brain almost to focus on positive things in your life rather than always being worrying and anxious. The other one I just wanted to mention, because I think it's interesting, is the New Economics Forum, which sounds
Hi everybody. I think we've actually just lost David for a second. I think we could all see that his connection was getting a bit patchy. I'm going to try and bring him back. Hope that's okay with everyone. But in the meantime, perhaps what we'll do when we bring David back is I'll get him to talk about tips for coping during the pandemic and beyond. But while we're bringing him back, Lisa, perhaps we can move on to your next question, which is about mindfulness. So can you tell us a bit about what mindfulness is and how it can help, and also whether learning a new skill could help? Over to you.
Okay, so mindfulness is about connecting to and being fully in attendance to the present time. So basically our lives become just so busy, like there's always something to do, that sometimes it's difficult just to take stock and just look around and really observe what is happening or what you were doing. And if you did take the time to do that, that is when you can become more aware of the thoughts and sort of choose how to respond to try and avoid like an overreaction or being overwhelmed by what is going on. It can be meditation and focusing on your breathing, maybe doing something like yoga, or it could just simply be being more aware of your surroundings in a day-to-day life. You don't have to talk to anyone about it. It's completely led by yourself, and you can do it whenever it suits you. So I'll just give you a recent example of how mindfulness helped me. So one day I was sort of juggling the children and work. The kids weren't particularly well behaved that day. Happens quite regularly. I had some reports to do, and basically I've been stuck in this house since the beginning of lockdown, like many other people, and the feelings started becoming a bit overwhelming. I started feeling a bit like maybe claustrophobic and frustrated, and having thoughts of I just can't deal with this. So straight away I was aware that they were starting to affect me. So I thought, right, what is going to help me right now? So as soon as my husband returned from work, I got on some running gear and I told him, you're having the kids, and I got out of the house. So I'm just jogging down the road because I'm not a very fast runner, and I was just looking at the scenery around me, taking note how beautiful the flowers looked, listening to the animals and birds around me, feeling the sun on my skin, and just enjoying a bit of fresh air. And that is sort of the breathing space that I needed just to clear my mind, just focus on the present, and then it instantly helped me shake those feelings. So I think it's important, if you start to feel sort of overwhelmed and absorbed by some like feelings and thoughts that you're having, that it's just to sort of try and bring yourself back into the present and really understand what is going on. And basically just remember that like a lot of the thoughts, you don't really need to use your time up on them. It just takes energy which you don't need to spend on that particular thought or behavior or feeling. But yeah, learning a new skill. So I think David was going to say that continued learning is part of the 5 ways to well-being, because engaging with education has proven to help lift people out of depression, as it is setting goals and giving you a purpose and a target to work to. And the majority of unions will have a union learning fund, and this could be an ideal time to utilise that opportunity. And community have funded hundreds of mental health courses in the last year. In my project in Wales alone, I've sponsored nearly 200 learners in mental health first aid, mindfulness, and innate resilience. So if you want to learn more about your own mental health or specific conditions, or how to help someone who has a mental health condition, then, just please get in touch. But the funding is not just for mental health courses, it's anything that's going to increase your skills, whether that is accredited professional qualifications or just short, non-accredited taster sessions. But it's definitely worth finding out more, and I've sort of provided you a link to our community learn page.
Thanks, Lisa. David, we lost you for a bit, and so we proceeded on with some questions for Lisa about mindfulness, but perhaps we can go back to the beginning of the previous question for you because the sound was quite patchy. So starting again, can you offer some tips for coping more generally during this COVID-19 pandemic and beyond?
Yeah, thanks, Anna, and sorry everyone for my connection issues. I've just been reading all the comments actually while I've been out, and I think everyone's coming up with some fantastic suggestions. And in a way, people have been very creative about this. Sorry, I keep cutting out. If it happens again, I will write these things down. So one thing I wanted to say is not working, is it?
What I think I might do is switch your camera off, because as lovely as it is to see you,
Switch the camera off.
We might, yeah. All right.
Yeah, do that. Yeah, is that better? Can you hear me now?
I think it's better.
Okay. Yeah, we lost you at the Three Nuns. Anne Ainsworth says yes. Okay. So yes, count your blessings, which are it's just like what Lisa was saying before. Every day before you go to bed, you write down 3 things that you're grateful for during the day, and these can be very small things. And I've just seen that some people have written down very similar things like gratitude apps. Someone was saying it was a very nice way to start the day. I think that the NEF 5 Ways to Wellbeing is particularly interesting in this, because what they talk about, and this again is similar to Lisa, connect with other people. We're often solitude is great sometimes, but we're happier when we connect with other people. Give to others. One of the key lessons from happiness research is that volunteering is one of the major causes of happiness. And at the moment, there is some absolutely fantastic volunteering going on. We have the largest peacetime mobilization of volunteers in UK history. And actually, people are enjoying this sense of community, sense of giving, and that can be a formal volunteering level, or it can be just chatting to neighbours. And as Lisa was also saying, keep learning. I think one of the key ideas about that is that the brain likes to be stimulated, and it goes back also to what I said about mastery, autonomy, purpose. Keeping developing, keeping feeling that people are making some progression towards what they consider to be their values. Other ones, gardening is a great activity associated with happiness and well-being. And I think also, what else have I got? The ONS asked people what was helping them to cope. They said films, exercise, reading, gardening, cooking. And I think that's there are some very interesting tips. Someone else also just said, my fear is going back to the rat race. And I think that's a very interesting point that the person who made that comment made, one of you. There's something about the situation which is kind of enabling people to take a step back, thinking about the way they live their lives, thinking about rushing around all the time, what they spend their money on, and making some kind of reevaluations. And you've all talked and written about things like doing simple things like connecting with nature, slowing down. And I think there's something about that which is quite important. And in the next, I think if you look at the Action for Happiness website and some of the 5 Ways to Wellbeing materials, there are some very interesting ideas for everyday activities. But as I said, count your blessings, I think, is one of the most successful research activities that's come out of this.
Thanks, David. I appreciate it is a bit of a boring screen when you can't see anyone, but I think if for now we switch the cameras off, it does help with the connection so we can all hear what David's got to say, because obviously it is really helpful and useful. So I hope that's okay with everyone. When we get to the questions, I think we'll switch them back on, but for now it does help with the connection. So David, another question for you. Some people are beginning to return to work, and understandably, many are anxious about this. So, can we draw any comfort from any wise and ancient thinkers?
Thanks very much, Anna. I think we can. I think the Stoics are the best philosophers for difficult times. Yeah, Stoicism is a very old philosophy, but it's something that some of you may have heard associated with, say, the British during Second World War. It can become a bit of a cliche, but the Stoics are very clear. One is about accepting the situation for what it is, accepting circumstances, and not hiding from them or diminishing them. And Oliver Burkeman says is don't pretend these aren't dark times. Acceptance can be bracing. And there's another idea about, really, I think this is really key, about negative capability. It's accepting what you can't control. And the key point that Stoics make is that once you accept what you can't control, you're actually then in a position to do things that you can control. So once you stop trying to chase after securing certainty and making sure that everything is fine and perfect, actually you then realize that you can actually do things to actually help the situation. The other idea from Stoicism, which I think is really interesting, is that no matter how difficult or hostile the circumstances are, you can always do something aligned with your values or what's important to you. And one of the quotes which Action for Happiness use, and which I think is really relevant here, is from Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl survived the Holocaust. He was at Auschwitz, and he wrote a book, and one of the things he said in it was this: everything can be taken from us, but one thing, the freedom to choose our attitude in any given set of circumstances. So no matter what the situation is, you can always do something to change your attitude, and to find a way you can control something. And this is very similar to CBT, these ideas. And the other one is actually looking at catastrophic thinking. And one of the Stoic philosophers says this: we are often more frightened than hurt, and we suffer more in the imagination than reality. And this isn't saying, face your fears and be foolhardy, but courage, and this is one of the, in terms of, the virtue of courage, is the middle ground between cowardice and excessive bravery. It's about not being foolish, but at the same time taking some steps towards easing anxiety. And I think the more that people are returning back to normal, the easier that it gets. But I go back to what Oliver Burkeman said. Don't pretend these aren't difficult times, and accepting that can be the first step to imagining what you actually can control.
Thanks, David. Right, I'm going to try and bring us all back and hope that the connection stays with us. Just one moment, because we've had lots of questions posted from you guys, from the viewers. So we're going to try and get through as many of them as we can. So first question is that, do you have any tips for retail workers to stay positive during stressful shifts? So with particular consideration to the stress they are under going to work, and then during free time, having to lock down at home, despite the fact that they are risked during the working day. I don't know whether, David, you're unmuted at the moment. Did you want to go first maybe, and then we'll hand over to Lisa?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the first thing about this is that your employers have responsibility. I think turn it off, Anna, because I think it's better if it's off, to be honest. Your employers have the first responsibility to ensure your well-being at work. Yeah, so that is obviously important. If people aren't feeling that, that's obviously something that unions will certainly be interested in. But I think that from what you just described, I'm not an expert in retail, but there is something about that you just can't really do much about. It is difficult and it's worrying and concerning. And once you've tried to maintain as much safety as possible, I think again it's about embracing the fact that you can't control things and that things are uncertain, and just being sensible with yourself. If people are worried, one of the things that happiness research says consistently is, just read some of the comments, writing things down. I think writing things down when people feel emotional, scared, is one of the most successful aspects of wellbeing research, and I heartily recommend it. Lisa talks about mindfulness as well, but I think it regards the specific question about retail. Yes, your employers have first responsibility. After that, I think it's accepting the uncertainty that you're under.
Thanks, David. I'm thinking, yeah, it's probably better we all keep the cameras off. This could be like a radio show rather than a webinar. I think that will work best for the rest of the time we've got. So, Lisa, do you have anything to add that are tips for retail workers?
Obviously, it is very stressful to go to work and to sort of think that you are potentially putting yourself at risk. But I suppose it's just trying to maybe focus on the fact that there is the recovery rate from the coronavirus is currently about 99%. So the chances are, if you were to get it, that you are going to sort of recover, but also not just to spend as much time thinking about that, because if you are thinking constantly, I'm going to work and I'm putting yourself at risk, then you're just sort of highlighting that negativity, and it's just going to continue to play on your mind. So again, it's just sort of taking stock and just sort of continue in what you're doing, and just sort of believe that what you are doing is for is sort of benefiting the country. You're feeding people, you're getting out there, you're on the front line, and you should take some sort of pride in that. And when you are coming to maybe the end of your shift or something, just sort of think about what you can do to sort of distress when you get home. Maybe do something that you enjoy, like maybe take a nice long bath, or go for a little jog, or spend some time with the family. So give yourself things to sort of look forward to when the shift is over.
Thanks, Lisa. I think some really useful tips there. So next question particularly concerns young people and apprentices. So the question says a quarter of young people have been furloughed, and a further 9% have lost their jobs. As many will be apprentices, what impact on mental health do you think that this situation has had on younger people in particular? So David, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, there's some real evidence that the people who are most struggling with lockdown, young males between 18 to 25, are also people reporting the highest degrees of anxiety and mental health conditions. I think one of the sort of worrying things that comes out of happiness and wellbeing research is that actually, when it comes to factors like loneliness, for example, young people are actually reported to be more lonely than older people, and young people's wellbeing is a real issue at the moment, I think. But at the same time, I think the response to that is kind of the response that other people have, which is there is an element of that anxiety which is kind of inevitable, and I think is best acknowledged, really. I also think that people, trying not to look too far ahead seems to be another piece of advice, which I think Lisa has she talks about not thinking too much. One step at a time. I'm a teacher, and we're doing online teaching, and as we can see here, it's not always fantastic in terms of the technology. It doesn't always work. I'm worried about losing my job because I'm worried about the fact that I might not get any students. And in a way, it's kind of inevitable. But I think we do have to support young people, because the danger is that they've already had quite a lot of impacts on austerity. One thing I do think is good, though, I think I've been reading some of the comments about neoliberalism and some of the philosophers. The state is back. And I do hope that there will be continued resources made available for people who are in situation like young people with apprentices. I can only imagine, though, that those schemes will be continue to be supported. And from my point of view also, I hope that fees will be reduced for university.
Thanks, David. Lisa, do you have anything to add with particular advice to young people and their mental health in this situation?
I do think that this is something that the government should sort of look at putting some funding into, to be honest, because, like David said, I think young people, sort of teenagers and young workers are probably going to struggle, a bit more with this sort of situation, maybe because they, haven't got as much employment rights, or they're apprentices, or, maybe they are at most risk with their job. So, I do think that there should be some services available to them if they are struggling. I know there is helplines available online, and there is some sort of support groups and things. I've seen them sort of on Facebook where people can sort of join in and talk to people who are in similar situations to themselves. And I suppose if you do know a young person, or you are a parent, then I suppose it's just talking to that individual and keeping an eye on them. And if you feel that their mental health is deteriorating, then maybe just help them through it and give them some numbers or assistance, so that they're able to help themselves, really.
Thanks, Lisa. So the next question concerns job hunting. So do you have any tips for staying positive during a search for work when it feels like a failure not being able to find a job or a suitable job? So first up, David.
I just think you don't need to feel like a failure. I think it's perfectly normal and natural to feel frustrated. I think lots of people are in the same boat. I think that one of the things I really hope actually out of this is that some of the stigma about unemployment will be reduced, because just as it was suddenly astonishing to hear politicians talk about ensuring that homeless people had beds for the night, suddenly NHS workers, the unemployed, the levels of sympathy are much higher. So I think that that's one of the things I hope from society's point of view. But from your point of view, I think, why on earth would you feel like a failure? It's an incredibly difficult time to be looking for jobs. And I guess one of the things just to hold on to is that things will improve, and I'm personally very hopeful that they will. But I think this is a shared frustration, and you're in the same boat as lots of other people, and I certainly wouldn't beat yourself up about it.
Thanks, David. Time is ticking, so I think I am going to move on to the next question, because a lot of the questions that have been posted have already been covered by Lisa and David in their main presentations. So we've got a question about what we can and can't control, which I think is quite an important one. So the questioner asks if you've got any tips about how to stop stressing about what may or may not happen, or to help them feel more in control. Let's start with you, Lisa.
Sorry, I can't seem to see that question. Yeah, so basically, it's just it's just what I've been saying before, really. It's about trying to limit the negative thoughts. So if you keep overthinking things and it's sort of stressing you out, just try and examine why that is stressing you out, and if it is really worth your time, or if it is just nonsense, because a lot of our thoughts are not actually facts. So we waste a lot of time stressing about things that do not materialize. And if you feel like things are sort of taking over and you're becoming so stressed that maybe you sort of feeling like you may having high levels of anxiety, or possibly lead to like a panic attack or something, then it's important to take stock and maybe practice some breathing exercises. There's sort of simple techniques available online, but a very simple one is just breathing in through your nose and holding your breath to the count of 5, and then exhaling through your mouth, and trying to relax the muscles in your face, in your shoulders, and in your stomach. So I think it's just important to sort of see when the stress is building up, and to take steps to try and calm it down before it sort of takes hold.
Thanks, Lisa. David, have you got anything to add about dealing with things both like that aren't necessarily within our control?
Yeah, I just think this accepting and acknowledging them is the first principle of, say, Stoicism. It's about, in whichever way you do that, sharing with people, writing it down. One of the reasons that things that writing down seems to work so well is that you have a more objective relationship with your thoughts. You kind of see them for what they are. But I think the first step is to acknowledge it, and then in a way you can do more about it once you actually accept what your feelings are about the situation. One of the other things is about giving when you're feeling down yourself. I remember there's a lovely quote that comes from the Dalai Lama about how, for example, when your head is full of yourself, what you should do is do something for someone else. It's counterintuitive. His argument being is that once you do something for someone else, the space of your brain is expanded, and your own presence in it becomes smaller. So you expand to become belong part of the world. But I think it's, if I was to sit here and say I'm not stressing about this, I'd be an absolute liar, because it's incredible uncertainty. And I think the only way that I know how to deal with it is simply to accept it, to talk about it. One of the things about mental health is particularly why men do worse on mental health stats, and indeed even live shorter than women, is because they don't talk about stuff with other people. They think it's unacceptable. But I think that those taboos can be broken. But I think ultimately, these sort of cliches about, doing one thing at a time, not trying to look too far ahead. What can you control right now? That's the key take home of philosophy, I think, for this situation. What is it you can do right now?
Thanks, David. I think we're just going to have one more question now, because it's quite a nice one to finish on. And even if we haven't answered every question, please don't think we ignore them. We do take them on board, and we use it to inform other content that we publish, and other resources that we send out to you. So I think a nice thing to finish on, which will provide a bit of a summary, I think, is this question. In your opinion, what would be the 3 key things we can do to maintain a balanced perspective when under perceived pressure? So yeah, top 3 tips. Let's start with you, Lisa.
Okay. Okay, let me just think. Right, so
I'm putting you on the spot now.
I know, I'm just getting distracted with the kids as well. So first thing is to take stock and just sort of observe what's going on. Secondly is to try and always find the positive, even if it's just something really, really sorry, that's the dog now, it's barking. And thirdly, maybe sort of list some of the achievements that you've had, just to try and get a bit more confidence in yourself, because I think we're all so easily.
Lisa, I'm just going to mute you for a sec, because we'll come back to you in a second for your top 3 tips. Just maybe let the dog finish barking. So David, can we just go with yours, and then we'll go back to Lisa, just because we couldn't hear you, and I'm sure they were really important. So David.
Hey, thank you. In a way, what I'm sort of tempted to say is don't do anything. One of the things about negative capability and accepting what you can't control is, in a way, stopping the idea that you always have to do something in order to solve an anxiety or insecurity. And I think actually stopping and realize and actually just accepting that there are that this is way beyond the scope of individuals is very helpful. On that level, I think on a practical level, maintaining some distance from social media and news sources, which are constantly pinging different things every day, is quite helpful. I think the other thing I'd say is about stimulation. Stimulation in terms of learning. I mentioned one of the NEFT 5 ways to wellbeing is about keeping learning, keeping the brain going, whether that's just reading a book or doing something different or watching a film or thinking about some way in which you can keep learning. And the third is really, the key take home of happiness and wellbeing research anyway. You're part of a wider community. Can you do something for someone else? Can you connect with someone else? Because all of these activities I mentioned share one thing. They all share something that's called flow. in which you're absorbed in what you're doing, and actually you're not thinking about yourself when you're talking with other people, or you're gardening, or you're running. That's one of its advantages, is to actually do things where you become absorbed in the moment. And I think that's probably one of the key things I'd suggest.
Thanks, David. So Lisa, I'm going to hand back to you, and if you could just tell us your 3 top tips again, please.
Yeah, okay. So sorry about that. My dog's automatic response to the postman.
No worries.
Yeah, so the first one I said was just to stop and sort of take stock. So, just observe what's going on, what you're doing. So sort of practice the mindfulness things, really. And the second one is just to sort of see the positives, even if the positives just seem, very small or minimal. It's usually a positive to something somewhere. So, always try and find the positive. And the third one is to list your achievements. I think we're all too quick to sort of pull ourselves down and to sort of look at things we should have done, or things that are going wrong in our lives. But more often than not, you've achieved great things. And I think sometimes if you just remind yourself that, then it sort of helps build your confidence and your ability to just sort of continue on, really.
Thanks, Lisa, and David, both really nice tips to end on, I think. I'm just trying to switch my camera back on. There we go. So I think that was a really helpful and useful webinar, and the time has flown. We've been on air for almost an hour, but thank you all so much for joining. It's great to see so many of you tuning in to this and sharing your tips and ideas in the chat. It's been fantastic. All that remains for me to say was to thank Lisa and David again for speaking on this webinar. You've both been brilliant. And also just to remind you that we've got another webinar in a week, and there's a big button underneath us here that will you can click on it and you can go and register for it now. It's about green skills and the importance of green skills in the workplace and a just transition. I am trying to bring David back for one last wave. There we go. It took a while to get the camera to come on. But thank you so much for joining us, and have a good rest of the day. And hopefully you'll get to enjoy some of the sunshine. So bye-bye from us.